Hey everybody, welcome to session 51 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Boy, do I have a great conversation to share with you today. I had the pleasure of chatting with Ashley Rose, who is the owner and director of Mission Cognition, a social skills development center. We talk about all things social skills instruction, something I'm deeply fearful of. She gives lots of great advice and takes lots of listener questions. And we talk a little bit about her work with some of the Facebook groups, particularly developing the ABA Skillshare Facebook group, which is a tremendous resource. And we talk about all sorts of other things as it relates to teaching these kind of, softer skills, if you will, things that at least someone with my background tends to shy away from. And so Ashley, after getting a bachelor's degree, she went on to pursue a graduate degree in special ed and a graduate certificate in ABA. And she's worked in the field of applied behavior analysis and special education for 15 years and spent the last 5 years working almost exclusively with social skills instruction. So she brings a wealth of information to this podcast. So you can check out her site at missioncognition.com, and that is more or less the consumer side of her web presence. Ashley also has a store for practitioners. It's called mission-cognition-share.com, and there you'll find all sorts of cool social skill lessons, data sheets, and things like that. And she's even hooked us up with a discount. So I will have the discount code at the end of this conversation, as well as at behavioralobservations.com. And it's good until June 30th of 2018. So you want to check that out if you get a chance, if you're interested in what we're talking about today. So without any further ado, let's get into this fun conversation with Ashley Rose.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Ashley Rose, welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
I am excited for this interview because this is an area I really know very little about. I think as our earlier correspondence has shown, I'm way more comfortable dealing with individuals with, destructive or aggressive or otherwise unsafe behavior. I'm very comfortable in that setting. Teaching social skills terrifies me, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot here. So thanks again for taking time out of your morning to join me today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, so let's get into it. I want to know how you got into behavior analysis and how you developed your interest in social skills instruction in particular. So if you can just kind of walk us through the timeline a little bit, that would be a great place to start.
Sure. I actually love the story because everything happened very accidentally, and I reflect back and just think how fortunate I am because circumstances sort of occurred the way that they did. So with this month being Autism Awareness Month, I shared a short personal video on a page of mine, but I'll go into a little bit more detail for you this morning. So I was actually a senior in high school, and a good friend of mine was working as a mother's helper for a local family in town. And there was a scheduling conflict or something came up, and she needed to leave that position and wanted a replacement. So she had said, hey, would you be interested in going to work with this family? It's 3 kids. The youngest son has autism. And I was a little bit hesitant because of the autism. I was not one of those people who was comfortable, or one of those kids who was comfortable with students with disabilities. I honestly was a little bit nervous. So I said, you know what, let me go and give it a try. She spoke so highly of the family. So I went and I met them, and just the loveliest family you could imagine. The little boy was, very, very cute. And my role there really had nothing to do with working with him. It was more the role of a mother's helper. So this is going back 15 years. I live in New Jersey, and we have a good amount of services even back then. So it was still very common for kids to be getting in-home ABA therapy, and pretty intensive in-home programs were running. So what was happening, as you can imagine, I'm sure a lot of us have seen, is that when there are siblings in the home, it's very hard for a parent to juggle and manage all of that time. So I was coming in really just to help siblings with homework, play some games, and do some things like that. So after a few weeks, the mom had said to me, what do you think you're going to go to school for? Well, I probably should have put more thought into that then. I did. I was torn between a couple of things, and I always joke that I really wanted to be FBI. So I'm a little bit of a jump, from that now. But she started to really encourage me to consider special education. She said, the field needs people. I think you would be such a great fit. Why don't you come and sit in on a therapy session? So I did, and it was not a great example. And I cringe a little bit to this day, nothing abusive or anything like that. But I definitely didn't feel it sort of jived with what I would envision a positive or engaged learning situation. And again, I had zero background. It was just going off of my gut feeling of, this doesn't look that fun to me. Mm-hmm. So I tried to think of a really tactful way to share that with the mom, basically saying, I don't think I'd like to do that. And then this is sort of the moment that I say changed my life or put me on this path. She said to me, hey, there's this new thing called verbal behavior. I'm really into it. I've been reading up on it. Let's go check it out. So she was friendly with a couple other parents in the school where the kids attended. And we went to, at 18 years old, I went to the 3-day intro to verbal behavior with Dr. Carbone.
Oh, my gosh.
And I know.
Talk about jumping right in.
Right? So I'm sitting in the front row. I have my, little legal pad, and I'm watching these video clips of all these kids just in therapy and having fun, and the focus on teaching language and language as a behavior. And I thought, this is so me. I not only do I think I can do this, I think I would love this, and I think I could be pretty good at this. So that was really my first introduction. I then read everything I possibly could. I read Let Me Hear Your Voice, the verbal behavior approach. I memorized the ABLES.
That's quite a feet.
Yes. I had the Mariposa manual, and as you know, Tracy Vale now is one of the admins in Skillshare with me, and it's just so cool to look back and see what a groupie I was, and now she's someone that I can collaborate and reach out to for help on a daily basis. So it's just so cool how things have evolved. I then had a family who needed to go to the Carbone clinic. There was some pretty significant problem behavior. They invited me to go along, so I got some hands-on training there, and then things just spiraled. I took a job as a paraprofessional in a verbal behavior classroom, which, at that point, 13, 14 years ago, a lot of places still don't have really formal ABA programs, let alone a verbal behavior program. So I just felt like I really had such amazing opportunities, and it really set me off on the path. So I have parents to thank, honestly.
Wow, what a cool, that's why I asked that question, because everyone has kind of a fun story or a unique story about how they entered the field. I oftentimes wonder what that story will look like in 10 years as the field becomes bigger, more standardized. It would be like, well, how'd you become a dentist, or how'd you become a PT? But at this stage of our field's development, that question is a reliable prompt for some good stories, and that certainly is an example of that. So thanks for going through that. So how did you get into teaching social skills specifically? I know that's not all of what you do, and maybe you can, kind of take a minute and talk about how, you went from there to the starting mission cognition and things along those lines.
Sure. So as you mentioned, do you feel more comfortable or maybe prefer some really challenging behavior? So I did that for at least 5 years, was exclusively property destruction, self-injury, aggression. And I loved it, but I was exhausted. But then once we worked so hard on our behavior reduction targets, I was left with a population of kids that had previously had limited opportunities to interact with others because their school placements were so restrictive. Out of district, self-contained programs, one-to-ones, sitting peers or others far away from them to keep everybody safe. So now you're looking at, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds who, because of limited opportunities, had a very limited social skill set. So I thought, I would really like to do something about this. So I started off just bringing in siblings and playing some games and things like that. And what I do now looks very, very different than what I did then. I've learned an awful lot. And I find that I was probably teaching more rote skills back then, which I think is very common in social skills. And I'm sure we can talk more about that. But my little groups that were just siblings then turned into smaller community groups. So I was getting a lot of interest from parents. My child needs this. My child needs this. So I subletted an office space, which was probably 400 square feet. And I just had 2 kids at a time. And a lot of times it was, a client and a sibling. Word spread like crazy. In a matter of weeks, I had people lining up at the door, people I had never even met. There was no intake, no assessment. I said, you can't come in until I have a little bit of information about, who your child is and what their needs are. So I thought, oh gosh, I better learn how to run a business. So I've learned quite a bit since then, and we ended up running groups. Started on the weekend only. I ran 2 groups on a Saturday. And we outgrew that space very quickly. We moved into a larger facility, and now I'm in a quite a bit larger center now. But I think it's important that we do what we're good at, but we do what we love. And I have such a passion for natural environment teaching. I really feel everybody deserves the right to have meaningful relationships in their life and connect with others and find joy. So I'm just happy to have developed a skill set that I can work on those areas and really target. We talk about the core deficits of autism and improving quality of life. So that's sort of what really drove me to focus on that area.
So tell me about the, development of the name of your company, Mission Cognition. Tell us a little bit about where you are and things like that, so other people can line up at the door and whatnot. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. But we're full here, so please don't. But so the name Mission Cognition actually came about long before I had a brick and mortar business. So my background basically was I started in home, then I was a paraprofessional. I was a teacher. I worked as a school consultant. I worked for a local university. So I was finding myself creating a lot of materials all the time, reading lots of things and training others. One of my roles in the school district was to provide the in-service trainings for teachers and paraprofessionals. So I thought, I think it would be cool to maybe start to share some of the things I'm making with others. So I thought, I have to come up with some sort of catchy name. So I thought to myself, I'm on this mission to learn and I'm on this mission to teach. So I came up with Mission Cognition. And really, I just think it sounds cool and it rhymes. We are a behavior analytic program, nothing to do with, CBT or so that would be outside of my scope. But it was so catchy, I liked it. So I kept it as we opened our doors as an actual, brick and mortar building. And then I tacked on Social Skills Development Center because Mission Cognition doesn't exactly scream, hey, they do social skills.
Yeah, one of the things that I think from a branding perspective, that's a pretty unique name. Has it caused any? I know you mentioned that you tagged on the other piece to that, but has that caused any issue with people thinking you're one thing and then finding out another? Or conversely, is it a situation where because it maybe avoids some of the historically baggage, if you will, that ineffective behavior analytic practices can communicate to stakeholders? Is that an advantage? Have you seen, or is it a little bit of both? I guess the long story short, what is, if any, has been the effect of that name from a branding perspective as it relates to marketing your services?
I see far more advantages. I think because it's catchy, people remember the name. Once in a while, I don't have a business card on me, just missioncognition.com. They find it, it's no problem. I don't have many questions from parents. Once in a while, another professional may say, just for clarification, maybe another behavior analyst may want me to clarify, asking maybe if we do CBT. But in terms of our website or anytime I talk about the program, I do say that it is a behavior analytic social skills program. So I don't see any issues with that. So really more pros. The other thing is actually before we were Social Skills Development Center, it was Special Education Enrichment Center, because my goal initially was to bring in other providers and provide social skills via maybe an art program or a music program. So still behavior analytic in nature. But when kids are actively involved in something and they have an activity going on, there's more interactions, there's more opportunities for conversation. So I thought some enrichment classes might be helpful. Issue with that is not every provider has the same exact philosophy I have or the same training. So I got away from that a little bit. I took out the special education piece when we started to get a very, very, very high functioning population. We have a huge ADHD population. Right now, only about 50% of our kids are on the spectrum, which often surprises people. Dyslexia, just learning disabilities in general, anxiety. So we serve a varied population, and the rebranding of us as just a Social Skills Development Center really opened the doors, and I saw many more families coming to us in need. A lot of kids who have no diagnosis at all and are either being bullied or are the bullies and are struggling socially for whatever reason. So we don't care what the diagnosis is. If there's barriers that we can see, we can work on those.
Wow, that's fantastic. And that is, of course, the mission of behavior analysis, right? To solve socially relevant problems with our science, regardless of diagnostic category and things like that. So that's super cool. And just to be clear here, so you are at, is it missioncognition.com?
So missioncognition.com is the site that was set up primarily for our families, so people who are interested in accessing our direct service. We started to get a lot of calls and messages from other providers, a lot of clinic owners who are saying we'd really like to offer this service, but are not sure maybe how to structure or set up social skills groups. So we do offer some distance consultation. Providers could go to that site. But what we're really working on now is sharing some of our resources. I script all of our social skills lessons, fitting a BST framework, which I'm sure we can talk about. And people are asking frequently, could you share that lesson or this resource or that resource? So mission-cognition-share.com is our newest site. And I'm just doing some blogging over there. If I read a great research article, we link or post it there. And then we're also uploading all of our resources for others who may benefit, and maybe cut out some of that blood, sweat, and tears that went in on this end and try to help them out a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic resource. And we'll have those links in the show notes of this episode. And again, that's mission-cognition-share.com is for
Correct.
Where people can find the materials and things like that. So, all right, very cool. Thanks for bringing that up. You probably know BDS for their CBA Learning Module Series, the premier exam prep and curriculum supplement for BCBA and BCABA candidates since 1998. But did you know that BDS has RBT solutions too? That's right. BDS has a variety of resources for individuals and agencies, whether you or your staff need to complete the 40-hour training or to prepare for the exam. Stop by behaviordevelopmentsolutions.com/free pass to download a free RBT exam prep tip sheet today. And while you're there, check out their array of RBT solutions. You can even visit the BDS bookstore and pick up a copy of the textbook, Principles of Applied Behavior Analysis for Behavior Technicians. You know, BDS has received feedback stating that not all 40-hour courses are adequately preparing RBT candidates for the competency assessment or RBT exam. As a result, many agencies are supplementing their training with the BDS RBT exam prep. And by the way, RBT exam prep by BDS comes with a pass guarantee, and generous bulk pricing discounts are available as well. So if you or your staff want to feel and be prepared to pass, you can rely on affordable RBT training and exam prep solutions from BDS. So visit behaviordevelopmentsolutions.com/free pass and download your free RBT exam prep and study tips today, and then check out all the RBT exam prep and curriculum supplement solutions from BDS. Let's, now that we've kind of set the table here, or set the context, let's talk a little bit about social skills in general. You know, as you know, I put out a call to the listeners to solicit questions, and there were so many overlapping questions that came in, and so there'll be some specific listener questions, but so many of them address the same concern or the same set of concerns. Some of them we're just going to kind of lump together here. So the big thing that I think that, and I kind of see this as how people might be struggling in this arena, if you will, is how do you just overall conceptualize the teaching of social skills? So whether that's, we got tons of questions about assessment. We got tons of questions about how to group learners. And we got tons of questions about curricula. You know, what do we use to teach? And then certainly lots of questions about the mechanics or the nuts and bolts of running groups. So if you don't mind, can you walk us through that process, or at least how to get started down that path? I know we could probably do several podcasts on this, of course, but you know, if you can kind of give us the overview of, you know, kind of how you tackle those various challenges, if you will.
Sure. So they're great questions. A lot of components of those questions I do still see as challenges, and some things I think that people tend to overthink a little bit or almost view social skills like this elusive dragon. And when you really start to break them down, you're going to see you'll either have deficits or you'll have excesses. So kids are either not doing things enough or they're doing things too much, and it ends up being a problem. It's a barrier to friendship or a barrier to positive reciprocal relationships. So I try to give the example of, if you're working in a school, you're familiar with, you know, the IEP process and the FBAs. If a child is engaging in a behavior that's impeding upon their ability to learn or the learning of others, you would do an FBA. Legally, they're entitled to an FBA. What do we do when their behavior is impeding upon their ability to make friends and have a meaningful life? So I think that we really need to do the same thing. So really that functional assessment piece. There's a lot of assessment and screening tools out there, and I do think they are valuable. Like, you have things like social skills rating scale or social skills improvement scale. I like the Triad out of Vanderbilt. Project Data has social skills checklist. Scott Bellini's book has a lot of good tools in there. What I find, most valuable is the observation. So in an ideal world, I would be able to do naturalistic observations. I could go into the classrooms or sit and watch recess or see the kids at the park. Unfortunately, time is limited. Also, that would transfer into financially, maybe a lot for families. So we do structured observations. So the families do fill out a screening tool for me, our questionnaire. I try to get as many teachers to us as possible, and most of the time the teachers are very happy to do it. Sometimes parents may be private as to whether they're accessing services, so they may not want to. Any other providers in home that are working with the kids, so as much different input from different people we can get is very helpful. And I use that as sort of an initial tool to determine whether I think this child is a good candidate for our program at this time. And I can talk about some sort of exclusionary behaviors as well. Then I want to meet the kids. So that's the second piece. So I watch them from the second that they pull into the parking lot. So I want to know, do they get out of the car and run up to the door and come in without referencing and looking back at mom or dad to see if they should come in? Are they kind of clinging to mom or dad and waiting to walk in? Are they refusing to come into a new setting for the first time? Do they look at me? Do they respond to my greeting? What do they do when they get into the playroom? So I sort of have this whole big checklist that I sort of run through when I see the kids. So that observation piece I think is extremely, extremely important. Day one of our group, so once we've determined that I do think they are a good candidate and I've grouped them, and I'll talk more about grouping because that's really, I think, the most difficult part. Day one of our groups is the structured observation. So we have a fairly large playroom here, and we place no demands. It's basically go have fun with each other, go play. And at that point, I'm taking a lot of data on, we'll do momentary time sampling for this. What are they engaging with? Are they actively engaged? Are they an observer? Do they initiate any interactions? What were their responses like to initiation? So I'm looking for that peer-to-peer pairing. Do they view other peers as reinforcing? Peer-to-peer manding, so making requests, responding to requests, again, that initiation piece. And then I'm looking for conflict. Was there any conflict? How was it resolved? So once we do that piece, I say that's sort of our final piece of the assessment, then we're ready to identify those specific goals and objectives. But it's very, very important that you're having sort of an initial screening process first. I need to look at what type of problem behavior is present, sort of what's the intensity, and topography matters as well in this case. Language abilities. I have our younger students, many of which may have a lot of language but would be considered nonverbal. Maybe they don't have speech. That's okay in our youngest groups. That's very challenging for us if I have a 10-year-old who doesn't have a formal mode of communication, because as the kids start to get a little bit older, our social groups are looking like much more formal social groups and less like just a play group. I see. So that's really what our assessment piece looks like. So again, it's really identifying those individual barriers. What is standing in the way of that child positively interacting with their peers? They're doing too much of something, or they're doing not enough of something else. And don't forget your norms too, because teenagers are not the most appropriate population. You know, preschoolers don't walk up to each other and say, hi, excuse me, my name is Timmy. Can I play trains with you? Yet for some reason, people like to teach that. So it's really, really important to understand what a typical population does. I mean, I made a video about potty jokes, which got an insane amount of views because I was saying, I don't care. I don't care if the 5 or 6 year olds, I prefer the 4s and 5s, making potty jokes to each other and laughing like maniacs because that shared humor. They're all laughing with each other. Gosh, what a successful interaction.
I know. It's funny. I was talking with someone once and they were like, why are we teaching these kids to talk like 35-year-old women?
Thank you. But so many times I've been in a school setting and I see them practicing social skills in the hallway, and they're walking down and they're greeting each teacher they pass, or they're shaking hands. And I think, gosh, what 9-year-old would shake a teacher's hand in the hallway? Naturally or spontaneously. We're actually making things worse sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I will get a population of kids that come in. I'll say, oh, have they done social skills groups before? Because you see these very sort of rote, unnatural skills. And I think, oh, I'm going to work to sort of undo that a little bit.
Okay, so sometimes you have to correct the history, if you will.
Right.
Okay, great. So when you talked about those videos, I know I see them pop up on Facebook periodically. Is that where you publish most of those?
We do. I started a YouTube channel, which really we were just using in-house for us because we use a lot of video modeling. So it's usually we have a little bit of downtime in the day and I pull a staff member and say, hey, real quick, can you film me playing with this Melissa and Doug pizza toy? And we'll create that video for one of our groups and post it. But I thought that might be another good sort of platform for people who maybe are not on Facebook or miss some of the video. So I'll try to be a little bit more consistent with posting there as well.
All right. So, yeah, and I just pulled it up on my phone real quickly on YouTube. So it's, if you just search Mission Cognition on the YouTubes, it looks like you've got about 22 videos there. So that's pretty cool. And
oh, wow.
Yeah.
It won't be too impressive. It's a lot of me playing with toys. So, you know.
Well, again, putting myself in the kind of extreme rookie social skills teaching position, I think that would be a great start. So that would
there you go.
All right, cool. And then so again, we'll put that link up on the website behavioralobservations.com, and we'll just make sure we have the Facebook link as well, so people can benefit from this content that you're putting out. If you're part of the marketing team for an ABA practice, it can be pretty confusing to ethically market your services. From limitations on using testimonials to challenges with using photos and videos, ethical digital marketing can be a virtual minefield. In addition to these ethical considerations, the various digital marketing channels that exist these days presents a dizzying array of options. Fortunately, I'm teaming up with two experts in an upcoming webinar to discuss how to navigate these challenges. First, Adrian Fitzer, owner of the Applied Behavior Analysis Center, and I will review the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code and discuss specific code elements that are pertinent to digital marketing. And then, Rich Brooks, founder and president of Flight New Media and nationally recognized speaker on entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and social media, joins us to answer questions such as, should I invest my time in Facebook or SEO? Should I build an email list or spend money on online advertising? Should I be blogging, podcasting, or posting video to YouTube? And how about investing in my website? Rich will demystify these challenges as well as present a framework that will help you determine the essential things to focus on as you grow your business. This webinar will be held on May 16th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and participants will receive 2 Type 2 Ethics CEUs. As a bonus, during the webinar, Rich will randomly select a few lucky participants' websites and provide some constructive criticism, tough love, or whatever else you want to call it. So for more information, go to the show notes for this particular episode, behavioralobservations.com session 50, and hit the links to learn more. I hope to see you there. So anyway, where were we? So we were talking about how to assess learners and things like that. So we got tons of questions about, hey, I've got these learners with these deficits or excesses, I guess, is depending on what the scenario is. How do I group them? And I see that, my world is more in the public school setting, and I see like OTs and OTs and SLPs kind of co-treating and things like that, and they do struggle so much with some number of things, but the grouping of the learners is something that's really challenging.
I do think that this is probably the most challenging piece. I'm fairly comfortable with, and I find our current method to be quite successful. Who knows, a year from now if I may start to change that a little bit. But with that initial screening tool, what we are primarily looking at first, like I mentioned, is those language skills. Level of independence, so is a one-to-one required to participate in activities? Is it all activities or some activities? And I'm looking at that problem behavior. So that helps me start to get an initial idea of, like I mentioned first, whether I think this student is going to be a good candidate for group. Because if the focus is going to be primarily on the reduction of pretty severe problem behavior, I would make that referral or make the recommendation to continue with the in-home, more intensive one-to-one ABA programming in the home or maybe another center, and then I can give ideas of what the prerequisite skills are to work towards. So that helps me sort of decide who's going to participate. Then we send out that more in-depth tool. So take the triad, for example. And then I start to look through and try to get an idea of what the strengths and areas of need are. I look at all of the applicants that we have. So we run sessions. We'll run a winter, spring, summer, and fall. And we'll get a lot of new kids each session. So some kids will get shuffled around. So I look at everybody's profile, and then I put together, number one, who I think may really like one another. And again, I do, excuse me, make it clear that we're not a friendship group. So if the kids do make friends with one another, that's great. That's fantastic. But they come to me an hour and a half a week. That's really minimal compared to the time they spend at other places, you know, school, whether they go to, they're into sports or whatever it is. So our goal is to teach the skills within group that they then use to form better friendships with the kids that they see more regularly. But I do want them to have a good time here. I do want them to connect with someone. So I do try to my best to put the kids together with other kids that they may like. Language is so important because if you're working on conversation skills, the kids need to have an appropriate conversational partner, right? That conversational behavior has to access reinforcement. So if I'm trying to talk to someone, they don't talk back to me, my conversational behavior may actually be punished. So we don't want that. We do form groups according to age and need. So I may have multiple groups for 7 to 9-year-olds, but the needs are very different, and that's why they're not together. So I have sort of my groups that are maybe a little bit more impulsive, but have very typical language skills. I have my groups that language is emerging, and we're really still working on maybe that joint control or joint attention, or we're trying to work on some of that observational learning stuff. So we really work very hard to identify what the specific needs of that group are, because we don't assign the lesson plans or write the curriculum until that group is formed. So I'm not trying to shove any kids into plans that I already have. I'm grouping them first. I'm looking at, okay, this group could really take 12 weeks of instruction on conversation, or this group could really take 12 weeks on go with the flow and reducing rigidity. So that's how they're formed. We are in a fortunate position because we serve a lot of kids. We serve about 70 kids in some capacity. So when you have numbers that high, there's a higher probability that you're going to get kids that go well together. What I see with a lot of places who are maybe just starting out is that you have fewer numbers. So you're trying to form groups with what you have. I would discourage people from forming a group just for the sake of forming a group. If you don't have enough similar peers, and you don't have peers who are maybe a little bit stronger and can serve as models in that group, wait until you do, because I don't think there's going to be strong enough benefit that it's a great use of the kids' time. And if they don't make good progress, that's a reflection on the program, and then your program may not grow. And I flat out tell parents, and scheduling is tough too, I say, based on all of the information that I have, your child is a best fit for Monday at 6 p.m. Well, Thursdays work better for us. And I say your child is a best fit for Mondays. I'm not going to put them in Thursdays. You know, I may list the reasons. And most of the time people will work to maybe shuffle some things around, or they don't come to us that session. And I'm okay with that. I'm not in the business to try to serve as many kids as I possibly can. I want to provide a high quality service. I want there to be real benefit. So we take our groupings very seriously, but it is hard. It really is. It takes us a long time.
I see. So you've mentioned a variety of curricular resources. Can you take like a deeper cut into that? And what are some things that you found that you like? Obviously, we can't diagnose on a podcast, or prescribe on a podcast, in terms of what to use with specific cases, of course. But what are some curricula out there that you found to be helpful? And I'm not just with our ASD kiddos, but I'm really curious about the kiddos with ADHD as well.
Sure. So I am a big fan of Peers. And so Peers has the professional resources, but then there's also a book called The Science of Making Friends. And that is a book that I recommend to all of our teen parents. Because right now the school manual is out and the teen and young adult. So the resources for the younger kids, I believe, are coming soon. So I only have the teen and young adult program.
And can you, for those who are unfamiliar, what does PEERS stand for?
Oh gosh, if my eyes were better, I'd read it from the wall. I don't know. I can't.
We can get that later. Yeah. That's fine.
Right. So
that's from like the UCLA group, right?
It is. Yeah. Yes. Dr. Elizabeth Laugesen. Hopefully, I didn't butcher her last name too much. But
all right, I'll find it and put it on the show notes. So go ahead.
Okay. They also have The Science of Making Friends. Co-author on that, I believe, is Frankel from a few years ago. But I love PEERS. I love The Science of Making Friends, and really because they talk about the use of ecologically valid skills, which basically means that they're teaching social skills that are naturally used by teens and young adults that are socially successful. So naturally used. It's not that we're emphasizing what we think kids should be doing, but we're teaching them what actually works. And that I absolutely love, because we spoke about what happens when you focus so much maybe on manners or those rote skills that maybe look good to adults, but really could be very unsuccessful in peer groups. So PEERS is phenomenal. I really love the book Building Social Relationships, Dr. Scott Bellini. And again, one of my big draws to that is he has, I believe it's 5 tenets. And number 3 is successful social behaviors are not always appropriate social behaviors. So it goes back to that potty humor. So I may think that's inappropriate, but if you're sharing humor with your friends, that's pretty successful. And I think I of course have to mention just the tremendous amount of research on PEERS. Skill streaming is another one. What happens, I think, in the social skills world is because people are a little bit afraid of social skills, they're really searching for these prepackaged programs, and there are a lot of them out there. And there are a lot of them that are very aesthetically pleasing, and you can just roll it out. I would really caution people against jumping blindly into those things. It's, if you work in a school setting, I'm sure you see a lot of that, as I know I have.
Yeah.
Purchase things and they roll it out, and I think, oh.
I see. Yeah, social thinking, kind of rules the world, at least in my neck of the woods, for sure.
Absolutely. Social thinking, zones of regulation.
That's the other one, yeah.
Yep. There, Superflex. There are great components to all of those programs, but where's sort of the analysis and the individualization? I think we really need to be making sure that we're using function-based interventions. So if you are a behavior analyst, you have that background, you should be able to read and take a look at everything and implement it via a behavior analytic framework. That's like your superpower. But you can't say that you run those programs as written, because the research base is just not there. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage people, don't forget about that sort of analysis piece. The other book I really, really love is called Crafting Connections. And that is based on teaching interaction procedure, which is very similar to BST with an additional component. It comes out of Autism Partnership. So if you look at some research or articles from Leaf et al., you'll find a lot of good stuff there. As we know, BST is a research-validated treatment package. So the main components are instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. With teaching interaction procedure, they also add like a rationale piece of why should you use this skill and sort of what happens if you don't. And then we're also looking at sort of that, I always pronounce it wrong, I think, in situ or in situ assessment, so that you're really making sure that the kids are using the skills where they're supposed to be using them, not just in your little clinic room. So those are some great books. With the exception of PEERS, we really don't run through any curriculum cover to cover. I just find social skills to be very complex. Every child presents so differently. So again, I'm really that assessment is really guiding our goal development. And then I use that BST or TIP framework to write the plans for the kids.
Got it. And again, we'll have those resources for folks who want to. I'm sure there's lots of listeners who are probably, on the treadmill or driving around their car, wishing they had a pen and paper. So we'll be sure to run down those references and have them available. If you want to earn a free Type 2 CE while learning about what precision teaching can do for you and your clients, you're going to want to visit chartlytics.com/Matt. Once there, you'll be able to see a short video that shows how an ABA agency radically improved outcomes for their learners using PT, guided by Chartlytics' cloud-based measurement systems. At chartlytics.com/Matt, you'll also find a free, newly revised and expanded ebook called Change Behavior, Change Lives Precisely. Finally, the team at Chartlytics offers intensive workshops on PT at various locations in the United States and Canada. You can find out where these are held at, you guessed it, chartlytics.com/Matt. If you do decide to attend one of these and you want to save a few bucks in the process, you'll find a coupon code there as well. So if you want to realize human potential through individual behavior change analytics, head on over to chartlytics.com/Matt. All right, that was really helpful to go through that. So we do have some listener questions still that kind of fell outside of that framework. So let's dive into those and see what people are interested in. All right, so number one, and you mentioned her book a few minutes ago. Mary Lynch Barbera, author of the Verbal Behavior Approach, and guest on session 12, I think, of this podcast. Let's see. She says, I have a few kids who are at the top of the VB map, but they're 8 or 9, so still a few years behind in their language and social abilities. I would love to know how Ashley balances recommendations for inclusion versus direct instruction in language, social skills, academics, etc. for these types of learners. So,
sure. Well, first, hi, Mary. Great question. We also see a population very similar to you mentioned, and I think it is tricky to keep that balance. I think inclusion is great, but there's a certain skill set needed really to benefit, but more so enough supports in the environment to make that environment conducive to learning. We can't just throw kids with special educational needs into a typical setting and hope that they're just going to learn just by the presence of other peer models. So we do need those additional supports. I am a big fan of direct instruction. I love language for learning. When we think about sort of higher level social skills and we think about conversation skills, that's a tremendous amount of language needed to be successful in conversation. You start to really see sort of where your feature, function, and class come in. So if you say, what's your favorite sport? Okay, well, I need to be able to identify other types of sports to engage in this conversation. There's a lot of inferencing needed in conversation. People don't often say, hi, let's sit down and talk about our weekend plans. You sort of listen in, you hear some keywords, and you're able to infer what they're talking about so that you can join in. So I think language for learning is absolutely a great program to continue with learners like you described who are maybe finishing up the VB map. It is so important that regardless of what the age of the kids are, that we're establishing attention as a conditioned reinforcer. The kids need to know that by attending to us, they can learn a lot of important skills. I mean, imitation is such an important foundation for everything, so much learning. So really without that foundation, I think we run into an issue with that, again, those rote skills rather than that natural and generalized social skills repertoire. So I would really focus on that with those level learners as well. Also making sure that they have that joint attention and also starting to look towards that observational learning. So maybe you pull in a SpongeBob character to sit at the table with you, or you pull in a sibling or a parent, because really to be successful in less restrictive environments, they're going to need those skills. In terms of the academics, the other thing I do focus on is reading. So when I have kids in here who are readers, I find that we're able to prompt much more efficiently because we can use text prompts. I mean, we have whiteboards laid out everywhere. So if the kids need a little boost with how to join in on that conversation, I can quickly write down a starter for them. It's so intrusive for us to interrupt a conversation with some type of verbal prompt. So if you're looking to continue to work on academics, I think reading, and again, that could be controversial. I'm sure there's people out there who think that's not as important, but I certainly see a lot of value in that. Let's see. So observational learning, joint attention. Other program that I think is important is like a what's wrong or what's missing program, because when you start to think about conversation, or you're not sure how to strike up a conversation, we often comment on what's happening in our environment. So you need to have that good tact repertoire, but we may frequently point out something that is odd or strange, or hey, what's that over there? What's going on there? To sort of initiate that conversation. So in order to say those things, you have to recognize that something's out of place or something is different.
Reminds me of the Highlights magazines.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of cool to really see the functionality of some of these skills that maybe you did tabletop, and then you're out in the world and seeing like, oh, wow, well, that's why we taught that, or that's why that's important.
Got it. Louisa has a question. I know you work mainly in a clinic setting, but do you have advice for working with teens in home settings? I can imagine there's probably, I'm just inferring from the question. So, Luis, I apologize if I'm making stuff up here. It wouldn't be the first time on this podcast, but I'm sure there's both excesses and deficits and things like that. So, what do you have any advice generally for people working in home settings, particularly with an older age group?
Sure. So I think it's a little bit trickier, but you can still teach social skills in a one-to-one setting. The book that I mentioned, The Science of Making Friends, it's really meant to be the sort of a parent coaching manual that goes along with peers, but you can absolutely use it as a professional in a one-to-one setting. It comes with a DVD, so you can have access to video models. That's great. In that setting, you're a guest in the home, so you're looking at sort of good host, good hostess behaviors in some sense as well, dependent upon the language ability. So really, in order to benefit from peers, there has to be pretty typical language skills and strong rule-governed behavior. So if you're working with a population that maybe doesn't have those prereqs, I like to do a lot of teamwork activities. So maybe you're doing projects together and you're each assigned a role and you have to do your part in that activity, because I do feel like that simulates friendship or other activities. We're working on something together. I also observe and see how much are you or the family having to compensate to make for successful interactions. And once you start to watch families, you're going to see there's a lot of compensating that goes on. So how can we work to reduce some of that and do more skill building in your client?
Great. Erin Murad writes in from Scotland. I work as a BCBA in Edinburgh, and one of my favorite parts of my job is teaching social skills and running social groups. I have been trained in social thinking. She recognizes that there's not enough peer-reviewed research, so she disclaims that right away. And she's also a peers certified practitioner. Her question for you, Ashley, is how can we as behaviorists do a better job of operationally defining targets for social skills that require the learner to synthesize information in real time and respond to multiple and complex social cues? I struggle when moving beyond targets such as initiating interactions with a peer or answering a question that's on topic, etc. So any ideas that you have for Erin would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. So this is definitely a challenging area, and I think that we have to make sure we're focusing on promoting proper stimulus control and generalization. I think that's really sort of why a lot of programs fail. we have to point out the relevant stimulus. There's a lot of prompting that happens I think people maybe are not aware of, and we need to focus more on teaching the kids what the cues are, what they really should be responding to in the environment. So that helps. Absolutely. She describes social skills as there's multiple skills. It's very complex. They're multi-element skills. So we try to look at a goal, a more global goal, and then we break down the components or smaller objectives. So you really have to think about that task analysis and meet the kids where they are and really scaffold and build upon step by step until you've reached that ultimate goal. And it can take you a long time, and that's okay. But with each step, you're getting closer and closer to being more socially successful. When she said complex or multi-component, it made me think of Mary Jane Weiss. There's a great video on YouTube, and it talks about how we need to teach the kids to really be more skilled socially. That's actually the name of our lessons that we write in the office, and not just have social skills. So you could have this huge social skills repertoire, know what to do in that situation, know what to do in this situation, but it needs to be very fluid and adaptive. And if you're not able to make those changes dependent upon the people you're talking to or the environment that you're in, it's unlikely that you will look skilled socially. And I think that there is a big difference. So I would encourage folks to head over to YouTube to check out that video as well. All
right, cool. Another New Jerseyite, Celia Heyman of the ABA study group. She asks, how do you share data with parents? Do you do it after every session? She feels that sometimes it can be challenging to share updates frequently. So just a general question about how to do that.
Sure. So that's constantly evolving. Right now, we are utilizing Dropbox. So each of our students has a folder. We take session notes, every group, and they just have a form. It's handwritten. It's fairly basic. It tells what the lesson is, whether the kids need a full support, emerging, or mastery, and some ideas for generalization or practice at home. That gets scanned and uploaded into Dropbox ideally immediately following every group. And then we do send home the data 4 times per session. So in 12 weeks, we send it home. I'm sorry, 3 times, so about every 4 weeks. So we do graph all of our targets, and then we upload that into Dropbox as well. And the kids get a final progress report at the end of the session, which would include all of that data.
Do you have learners who get into that in terms of looking at their acquisition and things like that? I'm just curious. It's not one of Selena's questions, but as you're mentioning that, I'm like, I wonder if, because, you hear kids sometimes, who are doing precision teaching and things like that, charting their own, pinpoints and so forth. I was just curious if you saw that in your practice as well.
I do. And this session, I'm actually going to include the kids a lot more. Already we utilize a lot of self-monitoring, but I think that we could take that to the next level in a lot of our groups. So it's a great question, and I got very excited because I want them to be invested in their progress, and I want to make sure that we have really targeted things that they want to change or that they see as a barrier as well. So once we have sort of that motivational piece, I think it really causes our progress to occur at a higher rate. So I'm looking forward to that this session.
Great. She has another question that kind of got at similar questions that other folks wrote in. And this is getting back to the issue of the mechanics of running groups. So she asked, are session activities planned by the BCBA, who incorporates activities for each goal? Does the BCBA run the groups? If not, has it been difficult for both the BCBA and facilitator to meet prior to sessions to ensure programs and activities are run as planned? So it's a lot of kind of questions about, I think, treatment integrity and things like that.
Yes. Great question. So I currently write all of the scripted lessons. And again, that does help with treatment fidelity. I want to make sure that we are using a BST treatment package. So I do write all of those. Each group will have a lead facilitator and a co-facilitator. So the leads are all master's level. So we have a lot of certified special education teachers who are either pursuing or have completed a master's in ABA. And then our co-facilitators come from varying backgrounds, all bachelor's level. So could be certified teachers. I have an instructor right now pursuing graduate school for counseling. And then everybody gets intensive training in our model. It is very challenging to find time to meet. I do utilize Dropbox for staff as well. So they get those lesson plans ahead of time. They do need to read through it quite a few times to be comfortable with the flow of the script. Ask me any questions ahead of time so we can sort of problem solve a little bit. They're familiar with all of the kids' data sheets. We review that prior to the session even beginning. And then we vacuum together at the end or put things away. So we definitely have our little powwow then as well. And then I call a meeting anytime if I start to look at a graph and either I see a plateau or I saw a spike in something and think, what's up with that? Then we come together to collaborate and try to brainstorm. But technology has definitely been helpful that I can utilize Dropbox to send out that information ahead of time so that staff can review in their downtime, because time is a hot commodity.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a non-renewable resource. And speaking of time, Celia was saying that she allocates tons and tons of time to material prep and things like that. Do you have any advice, tips, etc., for those people who might be struggling with that aspect of this type of instructional endeavor, if you will?
Sure. So we ended up scripting the lessons, and essentially what we have is a filing cabinet with every topic or skill I've ever come across that we had to teach, and we're constantly adding new ones because every kid comes in with their own unique set of strengths and areas of need. So within those files, we keep all of the resources pertaining to those lessons. Anything that's a little bit larger, like sometimes we have visuals, or we use popsicle sticks or something for active student responding. I then have labeled shoe boxes that correspond to all of those files. So it's taken me about 5 years to do that. And it's not done. And I always joke to staff, like, when this is done, and they sort of laugh in my face, like, that you will never, ever be done. And that's okay. That's fine. But yes, a tremendous amount of planning. But I do think it's worth it to really run a highly individualized program. I don't ever want things to be cookie cutter. So yes, the lessons are scripted, but within that, we can easily make modifications to certain games or activities or some of the words that we use.
Great. Lauren Molnar writes, when students are in a self-contained classrooms with few opportunities for inclusion, what are some ways to help facilitate social interaction with peers, especially when opportunities for, I guess, reciprocal interactions are limited?
Well, I would look at if reverse inclusion is a possibility, if students can come in from other classrooms. But at that point, I would really question whether or not that self-contained model is really most appropriate at that time. Could they go out for other activities? Because there has to be that, we know, a reinforcement. So if you have a student who's ready to start sort of making requests to peers, but the peers aren't responding, that's going to be an issue.
Great. Says Cruzado has a question about working with kiddos who may try to interact with peers, but doing it in ways that are, beyond the silly type of inappropriate behavior we discussed earlier. They may be, more on the border of unacceptable, as opposed to making fart jokes and whatnot. So, so if you have a kiddo maybe talking about things that are super inappropriate or what have you, and they're trying to interact with their peers, and they're just swimming with all the wrong strokes, if you will. How would you advise someone to kind of tackle that?
So when I hear situations like that, you don't want to forget about your FBI. So I would hypothesize then that you've determined that it's an attention-maintained behavior. So we want to make sure that they're not getting tons of attention for doing the wrong things, but that we are skill building so that you're teaching some replacement skills. So what can they do? Can you teach appropriate jokes? And don't forget about those norms. Watch the other kids in that setting. What are they doing that's so successful socially for them, where they're gaining a lot of peer attention, and try to teach those skills to your learner. So you want to increase their opportunities to be with peers, but you also have to make sure they know what to do when they actually are with those peers. And it can't be just don't do this anymore. It has to be a do this instead.
So if you have a kiddo who's doing something like this in one of your groups, and let's say attention is the maintaining reinforcer, are you able to, are you successful at having peers basically extinguish those responses?
Yes.
Because I can imagine that would be a challenge in certain circumstances if kids, say, using F words to get attention. That's a hard thing for kids to ignore, and I see this a lot in public school consultation and the regular classrooms where a kid might be acting out in such a way that doing any type of planned ignoring is really difficult. What have you seen in your situations or in your sessions?
We do have quite a bit of success with that. We do use a point system, and I kind of frame it to them as it's general, like we are a team. These are behaviors that help our team. They add value to our team, and these are behaviors that take away value from our team, and the kids learn how to respond to others who are taking value away from the team. Lower level disruptive behaviors are a lot easier to ignore. If it gets to be something that is like property destruction, pretty severe property destruction, at that point, the focus probably is going to be more on that behavior reduction. And then I would question whether or not the student is a great candidate for a structured social group at that time. But I'm surprised at what the kids really will ignore.
I see. Amaryllis Morales asks, where does insurance play a role in this type of work? And also a more of a mechanical question here, or nuts and bolts, is how are data collected from multiple children at a time?
Sure. So I can't touch on insurance too much because we are a private pay. We serve such a varied population. A lot of kids, insurance wouldn't even cover the service. So unfortunately, it can't be too helpful in that respect. But data collection, basically, you need to be like an octopus ninja. There's just, it's a lot happening at one time. So because it's such a natural setting, we're not really sitting kids down one-to-one and working on the target scale. That's a lot easier when you only have to take data on one kid. So what we have going right now is that we have one person primarily devoted to taking data. So they sit in the back of the room, and then an instructor and a co-facilitator is able to run that group, and they're able to take data right in the moment. So that has been extremely, extremely helpful to us. So that might be a good position for an intern or somebody that's newer to the program but does have a good understanding of how to collect data. To try to run the group, to be that lead instructor and take data at the same time, you're going to miss something, or the quality of your instruction is not going to be that great because your attention is sort of diverted in so many ways.
Got it. Ashley Bennett writes in with a fantastic question here. Are there tips or resources that would help including learners in the planning process, specifically helping them determine appropriate goals and objectives for themselves? Great question, Ashley.
Yes, I love that. So with a lot of our younger kids, or kids that maybe don't have as much language, it's harder for them to participate in this conversation. But I mentioned Scott Bellini's Building Social Relationships. There is a questionnaire for the kids in there. I think Piers does have that as well. Yep, so I have the textbook edition of Scott Bellini's Building Social Relationships is great, and it's awesome for staff training as well because it has a lot of comprehension questions for each chapter. But anyway, so there is interview directly for the kids there. I also, for the teens or the older kids, they have to want to be here. I do not allow kids to come if they say, I do not want to have any friends, or I have one friend and that's my best friend, and that's fine. Because then we're forcing ourselves upon them. And isn't it okay to have a smaller group of good friends? I just want to make sure that they have the skills, but then it's their preference to decide what they do with them. So once the kids do come in and they do want to be here, I then try to have that open dialogue, like, hey, what is going on at school? Are you having a hard time with this or with that? And a lot of the kids are very self-aware, and they can say to me, I had a fight with a friend, so I think the friendship should end. And then you realize sort of where you need to do that that skill building, and not all conflict ends friendships and things like that. So the kids are very, very insightful. I think it's very important to include them when you can and as much as you can. This is to improve their lives.
I see. And getting back to the point about kids who don't want to be there, and we can use air quotes to, I guess, frame that, but I can imagine if a parent is private paying and they're bringing their kid, there has to be some sort of conflict of vision, if you will, between what the parent wants for their child and the kid is like, no, I'm okay with, not having any friends or, having a small number of friends and things like that. And that probably puts you in the middle. And I'm guessing that it might be tricky to kind of resolve those two competing visions, if you will, of how a life should be led.
Right. I think it's happened twice out of hundreds of kids, so it's really not that common. You get kids that come in and are a little bit hesitant and think like, oh, they have this horrible vision of what a social group means, and then they come in and they're like, oh, this is fine, this is cool, we're just hanging out. Because I try to make it appear so natural to them. I want this environment to simulate the natural environment in which they socialize as much as possible. I mean, I have an air hockey table, darts, basketball net, every game you could imagine. Our Lego collection is pretty large. So I try to make it an enjoyable place to be. So if there's some hesitancy, I usually frame it as, hey, listen, come, give it a try. If you hate it, I'm not going to ruin your life, but I think you actually might meet some kids that you like, and think things could go well for you. And for the majority of the time, that works out fine. If it's a situation I'm really unsure about, I don't build a family until they come and they start, and we decide whether or not they're going to stay.
I see. Now, having access to all those materials and interacting with kids on this level, are you like an expert in like Minecraft and Pokemon? And do you have like an unnatural, vocabulary as a result of being this close to kids with these types of interests?
Not even a little. I mean, just when I think like, all right, I'm somewhere on their level, no idea, something new. Roblox and all these, the kids memorize every meme there is. I mean, it would really be a whole separate full-time job for me to try to keep up with this stuff. But fortunately, once you sort of get into that conversation, they can just go off and talk to each other about those things. And I just check in, you guys cool over here? Everything cool? And then I just support them if there's a conflict or something like that. But they usually kick me out of those conversations because my knowledge base is pretty embarrassing.
I see. All right. Stephanie Duang asks, she works in a school setting and she is being asked to teach social skills to students who are in the gen ed classroom. She has some experience using BST in a clinic, but she's not sure how to incorporate this into a school setting with students, especially when they have busy schedules and may not have actual session time and things like that. Do you have any suggestions for her?
Sure. So I think BST, and I would definitely encourage her to take a look at Crafting Connections and learn more about teaching interaction procedure if not already familiar, because it's really more of a push-in model as well. So you can just state to the kids what the expectations in that classroom are, how they are expected to treat one another, respond when problems come up. And then it's a ton of modeling and feedback in that moment. So I think that's a great model. I actually prefer that to pulling kids out and trying to work on it in a more clinical or structured setting. So I think there's a lot of great things that could happen in that classroom. You just have to be a little bit maybe more creative at first and make sure all the teachers are on board and sort of know how to model and provide feedback right in the moment that maybe social issue is occurring.
All right, cool. Stephanie, thanks for that question, and thanks all of you who took time to write in the listener question segments, my favorite part of the podcast. So before we get to our kind of close here, remind us again where people can find you if they want more information.
Sure. So if you're a provider and you're needing some support in maybe launching or expanding your social skills program, you can come to www.missioncognition.com. We have a separate site now, which is where we are going to house our resources that you can download or purchase. I'll also put some blog posts up there on various social skills or play topics, which would be mission-cognition-share.com. we're a little bit on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we are also on YouTube.
Great. And I forgot to ask about ABA Skillshare as well. That's something that's been a brainchild of yours of sorts, something that I see you post on there a lot. So for those who don't know what ABA Skillshare is, can you talk a little bit about that real quick?
Sure. So that was actually my little OBM pet project. A lot of people may not know, but I was also feeling very sort of alone in the field. And I knew that there has to be a population of professionals out there who are really just constantly striving. If I take Megan Marie Miller's term, hashtag do better. Everybody's trying to do better. And I wanted to find those people, and I wanted to network with like-minded people who love what they do and are constantly just motivated to absolutely do the best that they can. So I thought, maybe one other person would want to participate in this with me. So I launched ABA Skillshare. And another reason, sort of catalyst for that, was the level of disrespect that I saw in other groups, and how people speak to each other was just really disheartening. And I thought there's got to be something that we can do about that we maintain a professional and ethical forum, but also, quote unquote, kindness counts. I mean, I teach social skills, so there's going to be a certain level of respect or that I want to see in that forum. And I'm just really happy and proud of what it's turned into. I've gotten quite busy, so I'm not as active as an admin, but I think it's great that other people are really working hard to follow the rules and keep it ethical and do report things that maybe violate some guidelines. But it's just really cool to see how many people willingly share things that they've created. A lot of time and effort goes into the work that they've done. And it's just so valuable to have a network of colleagues to collaborate with and support. So thank you to everybody who participates.
Yeah, and so that's on Facebook. So you can search in groups for ABA Skillshare. Very cool. All right. So last question here. It's a question I close every interview with is, what advice do you have for a newly minted BCBA?
My advice would be, you don't know everything, and that's okay. That's desirable. Find people who know a lot more than you do. Spend a lot of time with them. Ask them a lot of questions. Mentors are great. Respect the families that you work with. So I always say, yes, you may have gone to school for this, but that family lives with that child or that individual all day, every day. They are an expert in their child. So respect that knowledge base and collaborate to work together to really come up with the best plans that you can. And also, don't forget to be an analyst. Don't be so caught up on having to buy this book or this curriculum or that assessment tool. Make sure you really understand how to identify individual goals and objectives and write programs from scratch. It doesn't mean turning to page 42 in a book. I mean, you really, really need that skill set. And congratulations.
All right. Yeah, I think Megan Miller would be fist pumping a big time with that last bit. So, all right, Ashley, this has been tremendously helpful for me, and I think it's going to be tremendously helpful for the listeners of the show. Thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast and share this wealth of knowledge. All right, folks, I hope you learned as much as I did. I know I said it like 3,000 times during the interview, but all those resources will be in the show notes at behavioralobservations.com, and just search for Ashley's session. I think it'll be session 51 by this time. And the discount code for her store, the mission-cognition-share.com, is the following: BEHOBS 2018, and that's all lowercase. Again, that's BEHOBS 2018. And again, I will have that in the show notes as well, and that'll get you a little bit of discount if you wish to partake in the things that she has for sale. Again, lessons, data sheets, all sorts of cool stuff. Take advantage of the work that she's already put in and save yourself a little bit of time. I think that's all for now, and we will see you in the next session of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.